for the floor to make a statement. I give them the floor.
Mr. President,
Открыто отдаете предпочтение Украине лишь потому, что она ваш геополитический проект. Проблемы остального мира, получается, вас не волнуют. То же самое касается беспрецедентного числа делегаций, приглашенного сегодня по правилу 37. 12 стран Евросоюза вдобавок к высокому представителю Жозепу Борреллу. Совета за счет западных стран. Вы просто превращаете свой совет в инструмент своих прихотей. Благодарю.
I would like to warmly welcome the Secretary General and the distinguished ministers and other high-level representatives. High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy to participate in this meeting.
And they exist precisely to address any grievance, whatever it may be. 1 year ago, I sat in this council and urged, and I quote, "In the name of humanity, do not allow to start in Europe what could be the worst war since the beginning of the century, with consequences not only devastating for Ukraine, not only tragic for the Russian Federation, but with an impact we cannot even foresee in relation to the consequences for the global economy. A crisis not seen in Europe in decades. More than 8 million Ukrainian refugees have been recorded across Europe."
I said that Russia would manufacture a pretext and then use missiles, tanks, soldiers, cyber attacks to strike pre-identified targets, including Kyiv, with the aim of toppling Ukraine's democratically elected government. Russia's representative, the same representative who will speak today, called these, and I quote, "groundless accusations." 7 days later, on February 24th, 2022, Russia launched its full-scale invasion. Due to fierce resistance by Ukraine's defenders, President Putin failed in his primary objective to conquer Ukraine, end its existence as an independent country, and absorb it into Russia. Then, he dusted off his Crimea playbook from 2014. He called snap referenda in 4 occupied parts of Ukraine, deported Ukrainians, bussed in Russians, held sham votes at gunpoint, and then manipulated the results to claim near unanimous support for joining the Russian Federation. When President Putin couldn't break the Ukrainian military, he intensified efforts to break Ukrainian spirit. Over the last year, Russia has killed tens of thousands of Ukrainian men, women, and children, uprooted more than 13 million people from their homes, destroyed more than half of the country's energy grid, bombed more than 700 hospitals, 2,600 schools, and abducted at least 6,000 Ukrainian children, some as young as 4 months old, and relocated them to Russia. And yet, the spirit of the Ukrainians remains unbroken. If anything, it's stronger than ever. When Ukraine launched a counteroffensive that retook large swaths of its territory, President Putin conscripted an additional 300,000 men, throwing more and more of Russia's young people into a meat grinder of his own making. And he unleashed the Wagner Group, mercenaries who have committed atrocities from Africa to the Middle East and now in Ukraine. Of course, that's not the whole story of the last year. There's also the story of Ukraine's people. Vastly outnumbered, they have fought bravely to defend their nation, their freedom, the right to determine their own future. And they've demonstrated inspiring unity in helping one another endure Moscow's relentless assault. Teachers and community members give classes in bunkers to children. City workers improvise patches to restore heat and power and water to residents. Neighbors set up soup kitchens to feed the hungry. There's also the story of how the international community has come together. The vast majority of member states have voted multiple times to condemn Russia's violations of the UN Charter and reject its illegal attempt to seize Ukrainian territory. Yesterday, 141 countries voted in the General Assembly for a resolution that reaffirms the core principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity, denounces Russia's atrocities, expresses support for a just and comprehensive peace in accordance with the United Nations Charter. When President Putin tried to weaponize hunger, exploiting the worst global food crisis since the creation of the UN, the international community responded swiftly. Since the United States chaired a food security meeting last May, more than 100 countries have signed on to a set of concrete commitments to alleviate hunger. Thanks in large part to the Secretary General, Guterres, and Turkey, the Black Sea Grain Initiative loosened Russia's stranglehold on Ukraine's ports and brought down the cost of grain for the world. Now, as Moscow again tries to throttle its output, we have to ensure that that initiative is extended and expanded. When President Putin tried to weaponize energy, we redirected natural gas supplies from across the world so that countries Russia targeted could keep their people warm in the winter. And Europe took extraordinary steps to end its dependence on Russian energy. No country has endured greater hardship from Russia's war than Ukraine. But almost every country has felt the pain. And yet, nations around the world continue to stand with Ukraine. Because we all recognize that if we abandon Ukraine, we abandon the UN Charter itself and the principles and rules that make all countries safer and more secure. No seizing land by force. No erasing another country's borders. No targeting civilians in war. No wars of aggression. If we do not defend these basic principles, we invite a world in which might makes right, the strong dominate the weak. That's the world this body was created to end. And members of this council have a unique responsibility to make sure that we do not return to it. We can do that in three ways. First, we must push for a just and durable peace. Now, I expect that many countries will call for peace today. No one wants peace more than the Ukrainian people. And the United States has long made clear, even before this war, that we're prepared to engage in any meaningful diplomatic effort to stop Russia's aggression against Ukraine. But history teaches us that it's the nature of peace that matters. For peace to be just, it must uphold the principles at the heart of the UN Charter: sovereignty, territorial integrity, independence. For peace to be durable, it must ensure that Russia can't simply rest, rearm, and relaunch the war in a few months or a few years. Any peace that legitimizes Russia's seizure of land by force will weaken the Charter and send a message to would-be aggressors everywhere that they can invade countries and get away with it. President Zelensky has put forward a 10-point plan for a just and durable peace. President Putin, by contrast, has made clear that there's nothing to talk about until Ukraine accepts, and I quote, the new territorial realities, while doubling down on his brutal tactics. Members of this council have a fundamental responsibility to ensure that any peace is just and durable. Council members should not be fooled by calls for a temporary or unconditional ceasefire. Russia will use any pause in fighting to consolidate control over the territory it's illegally seized and replenish its forces for further attacks. That's what happened when Russia's first assault on Ukraine froze in 2015. Look at what followed. And members of this council should not fall into the false equivalency of calling on both sides to stop fighting or calling on other nations to stop supporting Ukraine in the name of peace. No member of this council should call for peace while supporting Russia's war on Ukraine and on the UN Charter. In this war, there is an aggressor and there is a victim. Russia fights for conquest. Ukraine fights for its freedom. If Russia stops fighting and leaves Ukraine, the war ends. If Ukraine stops fighting, Ukraine ends. The fact remains, one man, Vladimir Putin, started this war. One man can end it. Second, even as we work to end Russia's war against Ukraine, members of this council must continue to address other challenges to international peace and security. We hear the concerns of countries who worry that Standing with Ukraine and holding Russia accountable is diverting focus and resources from others in need. To those countries, I would say simply, look at our actions. And when you hear Russia and its defenders accuse the countries who support Ukraine of ignoring the rest of the world, I say, look at Moscow's actions. Compare the numbers. In addition to the $13.5 billion in food aid that the United States contributed to fight hunger over the last year, we also fund more than 40% of the World Food Programme's budget. Russia contributes less than 1% of that budget. That's not an outlier. Based on the latest UN figures, the United States donates over 9 times as much as Russia to UN peacekeeping. We donate 390 times as much as Russia to UNICEF. We give nearly 1,000 times as much as Russia to the UN Refugee Agency. Third, we must reaffirm our commitment to upholding what the UN Charter calls, and I quote, the dignity and worth of the human person. We must continue to compile evidence of Russia's ongoing and widespread atrocities, including executions, torture, rape and sexual violence, the deportation of thousands of Ukrainian civilians to Russia. We must continue to document Russia's war crimes and crimes against humanity and share this evidence with investigators and prosecutors so that one day the perpetrators can be held accountable. Day after day of Russia's atrocities, it's easy to become numb to the horror, to lose our ability to feel shock and outrage. But we can never let the crimes Russia's committing become our new normal. Bucha is not normal. Mariupol is not normal. Irpin is not normal. Bombing schools and hospitals and apartment buildings to rubble is not normal. Stealing Ukrainian children from their families and giving them to people in Russia is not normal. We must not let President Putin's callous indifference to human life become our own.
The representative of the Russian Federation has asked for the floor to make a statement.
Mr. President, we are getting up on our feet to honor the memory of all victims of what has happened in Ukraine, starting in 2014. All of those who perished, all lives are priceless, and that is why we're rising to honor the memory of them all.
I thank the representative for their statement. Can you write? I thank His Excellency